So, welcome back. This is my YouTube channel where I talk about all topics, discuss sort of current events and things that are important, legally speaking. And today I'm joined by my brother-in-law, who is a retired FBI agent and currently runs an investigative company out of Mississippi, Chris Hinkle.
Thanks. Happy to be on here. Thanks.
So, just a little bit of background about you. When I first, I guess, started dating your sister, you were living in DC, right?
I may have still was I still in the Air Force at the time, living in Mississippi? What
It
year was it?
was 2000, 2000, 2001.
I was living in DC.
Yeah, so I think she was telling me that you were doing cyber crimes at the time. Is that what you were doing, or what
Yeah,
were you doing?
yeah, a little bit of background about how I got to that. I'm not a cyber hacker expert as far as sitting at a keyboard and engaging in battle through code with adversaries. I'm able to understand and comprehend and kind of know where to look in the cyber area, but my forte is more of conducting the investigation. You could be an expert computer hacker and have all kinds of degrees in computer science, wouldn't make you a good FBI agent. Having an FBI agent with no background in cyber, you might be able to navigate some cases in cyber, but you wouldn't be able to actually uh, run an effective case. So I had some background in training. So a little bit about me. I spent 13 years in the Air Force. In the last 5 of it, I was a special agent with the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. During that time, the Air Force was starting to set up a cybercrime or computer investigations division. There's a lot of famous people out there now that got their start about the time that I did in 1994. One of those is Kevin Mandia, who ended up running Mandiant, and then now has, I believe it's called FireEye. So Kevin was a fellow OSI agent at the time, and we all kind of went through the same basic training. Fortunately, I didn't have any bad habits with cybercrime, with working with computers. There's some people that have some self-taught skills that maybe they're not the most effective way to collect and preserve evidence in conducting an investigation. So I didn't have any of those bad habits. At least that's what the instructors told me. So at the time, there was a guy named Howard Schmidt that was starting up this computer forensic field investigator program. Now, Howard went on to be the cyber czar in the Bill Clinton administration. So, and then later worked for Microsoft. So, so Howard had sent this test out to just see what the aptitude was for someone to learn about computers. I took the test and apparently did very well. So I was in one of those first classes. It was a 2-week class to come up and learn how to be a computer forensic field examiner. The idea was we had regional computer forensic examiners, and they were overwhelmed with cases that were being sent to them from all over the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. And their idea was basic investigations involving a computer, that the field agent could actually run that, or someone from the detachment, kind of like a small field office for the FBI. So I went to the 2-week class. They issued me this computer. They issued me a bunch of software, some from Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Some of it was self-developed software inside the OSI. And I was able to go in and do forensic analysis on computers, primarily Microsoft systems. So fast forward, I was finishing up my degree at the University of Southern Mississippi and was working some cases with the FBI out of Jackson, Mississippi, and they approached me about joining the FBI. Everything kind of fell into place about the right time. I tell everybody that, God kind of has his hand, not kind of, God has his hand in everything that you do. So about the time I was trying to determine, was I going to continue on with the Air Force career or get out, uh, I got a notification. Well, we found out that we were expecting our second child, Josh. And most people would think, well, I don't want to give up the benefits of the military, the job security. Let's just stay with the military. Well, God had a different plan. So I received orders for a 6-month uh, assignment to Prince Sultan Air Base, Saudi Arabia, to conduct counterintelligence work. Now, as an OSI agent, you don't wear any rank, you don't show up in any base rosters or anything like that. You're almost like a ghost. So even your uniform doesn't say anything. It just says special agent. So Pam and I prayed about it, my wife, and we looked at, okay, you're going to go to Saudi Arabia, kind of a wartime environment at the time. And
what year was this?
This was around spring of '98. So they said, you're going to go over there, special agent. To me, special agent, if I looked at it as if somebody's trying to target someone, they see special agent, they think spy. And I think it would have opened me up to additional dangers. So we decided we were going to jump ship from the Air Force. Jumped in blind faith. I started applying for the FBI. It took about a year to get through the process. We left the Air Force in January of '99. Josh was born, and our second child was born in February of '99. So had I gone to Prince Sultan Air Base, Saudi Arabia, I would have missed his birth. I would have been gone for 6 months. And they don't just send you back because your wife's having a baby. So we got out. I did some part-time work, some temp work here and there, and finally got accepted by the FBI and got on with them during the spring of 1999, went into the FBI Academy. They looked at my background, kind of like a CV you fill out that when you get to the FBI Academy to determine where you're going to be placed. And a guy that was my very first supervisor, Rich Ress, he's retired, long since retired. He actually runs an investigative firm out of Virginia. And Rich picked up on my background saying, well, this guy has some understanding of computers. He's conducted cybercrime investigations. I think he'd be a good fit. And at that time, the Washington field office had the National Computer Crime Squad. So there weren't a lot of cyber squads in the FBI at the time. And when I tell people the limitations that we had as far as equipment, they're shocked. We were far superior in the Air Force with what we were doing cybercrime wise. So I show up on the National Computer Crime Squad. I'm based out of Washington, D.C., actually in a satellite office in the Falls Church, Virginia area. And the only piece of cyber equipment I have to conduct the investigation was an IBM ThinkPad laptop that they issued me in the academy. That was it. So you really had to understand how computers work and where evidence might be. And then you can task people like computer scientists that support your case to, hey, I think it would be here. What do you think? So you kind of work in a collaborative format. I got really successful at it. And my forte in cybercrime investigations was building a network of a cyber undercover infrastructure. So in DC, you have a unique circumstance where you have multiple jurisdictions where you can present cases. So I could go to the District of Columbia, or I could go to the Eastern District of Virginia. And because of that, and the way that I was able to set up this undercover network, in other words, I built layers of things so that I appeared to be something else on the internet. Back then, we were even using things kind of like a dial-up connection, a go to my PC type connection. So we would set things up in what were pre-staged, pre-built, what they call backstopped and covered office locations. And I got with the undercover coordinator at the time, and I said, hey, what do you think about letting me put some internet service in there, put a computer network in there? You can use it however you want. Just leave me my little space on this computer. And then I could use my remote access in our lab adjacent to my cubicle. I could go into the lab. I could go to my PC to dial in, and then use, at that time, a DSL connection to go out. So in in conducting cybercrime investigations at that time, I kind of understood the way that hackers work. They don't have a lot of time to do what they do. They don't have a lot of time to validate who you are, and they tend to stay in one small area to validate who you are. So if a computer hacker was saying, well, this guy says he's coming from Virginia, and they figure out some way to validate connecting to that computer to determine that, everything about that computer I'm connected to comes from Virginia. It would show that I'm on a DSL connection. I'm engaging in conversation, online conversation and emails, everything through a connection in Virginia. At no point were they suspicious enough to check to say, well, I wonder if he's dialing into that computer and then going out. So you tend to not look in the dial-in logs. So we use that to our advantage. And I built this computer network. You probably could do a Google search and still find it.
There was that sounds like a VPN, right?
Sort of. Yeah, it's a VPN, but it's a dial-up VPN. Because with a VPN, I might be using my fiber optic network here to VPN, through an IP address to another computer and then go out from that IP address. With the dial-up, I actually dial the telephone number with the landline plugged into the back of that computer, so it rings and answers, and then I operate the computer remotely. So it's a literal dial-up connection. There's no IP address.
Like Matthew Broderick.
I guess. Do you want to play a game? So I built this network, and if you do a search, you might still find some old press releases on it. It was called Cyberhook Next Gen. There was an undercover platform that a friend of mine had set up called Cyberhook. And here I come in and I said, well, we're just going to go next generation. So I had some great people that I worked with at the time, very smart agents on the squad that worked with me. And we built this network. And then we built a lot of undercover personas where each of us had 4 or 5 different ways that we could appear. Everything from bank accounts to credit cards to driver's license, all kinds of things. And it worked out really well.
What kind of crimes were you guys investigating?
Well, at that time, it was a lot of intellectual property, copyright, and software theft. When you're in the DC area, you have direct access to trade associations. So I had trade association contacts like Business Software Alliance, and a lot of their customers were Microsoft, Activision, Nintendo, things like that. So when you have that direct access, they're wanting to say, hey, can you help us out? We're hemorrhaging money. And back then, some of the Microsoft software was very expensive. I can't remember the name of the software, but there was some software that I bought in an undercover format from this Russian guy out of New York. And the software was $26,000 a copy. And this guy had copies of it that he was duplicating and selling for like $1,500. So we had a significant impact. We tended to go after the larger targets. Another case, I had Nintendo contact us. And back when they used to have these little Nintendo cartridges that would have a game on it that you play on like a Game Boy, like Game Boy Advanced. What people didn't know is those cartridges were capable of holding more than just one of those games. So there were people that would hack that cartridge and then duplicate it, and they would put like 200 games on it that you could play off of your Game Boy. Well, that's 199 copies of something that are being sold illegally. And, what I would do is I'd find these things for sale, or just from using investigative, hunches of trying to look and just find people selling things online, or these people from the trade associations would contact me and say, hey, here's a person, we're losing like, $10 million a year, or at least $10 million that we can identify right now just from this one person. The Russian guy, he got sentenced for $10.6 million in losses to software companies. So getting back to the conducting the actual cyber case, again, I don't have a computer science degree. I took some computer classes. I was trained as a computer forensic field examiner, where I knew how to collect and preserve evidence. That was actually more important than learning the nuances of how to code. So I knew where Microsoft systems stored information that might be evidence. I knew where to look on that, and that's where my forensic background came in. It helped me out in conducting the investigations because I knew the things that I was collecting, the evidence. I was able to say, okay, well, if I engage in this type of communication or this person does X, Y, or Z, here's some evidence I'm going to find that's going to help me validate the information that I have. And because I'm trained in collecting evidence, I was able to maintain the integrity of it. And you as an attorney know when you go into court, if the evidence is collected, if it doesn't have its integrity, it's going to cause you some problems in court. You're going to have a good defense attorney like you that's going to be able to question it. It's one of
Chain
the
of evidence. Yeah.
yeah, kind of a chain of evidence, but it's also not just chain of evidence. It's what actions are you taking with that evidence that may negatively impact it? Are you altering that evidence? It's one of the reasons that when I would do the forensic examination, you never work on the actual evidence. So you bring the hard drive in, you mirror it, and you actually mirror it to two different drives. So you've got your original copy, you got a control copy, and then you got your working copy. So that way, if you ever have a problem with the working copy, you still don't go back to the original piece of evidence. You go back to that mirrored copy. Yeah. So anyway, I started getting the attention of some people at headquarters based on how successful I was being as an investigator. It wasn't necessarily that I was a cyber investigator. It was the fact that I kind of understood how to put a case together, how to bring teams together. And I got approached from a friend of mine that was FBI headquarters at the newly created cyber division. So I joined the FBI in 99. There was no cyber division. The only support we had from the National Computer Crime Squad was a small unit of about 8 people that were in a white collar crime program of the FBI. So we didn't have resources for anything. When a big boom in looking at creating the cyber division, they got funded. They had a lot of money to spend. It was beneficial to be in DC because I could go directly and talk to the person that was in charge of distributing the money. And it's harder to tell people no to your face than it is online or on a telephone call. So I had a unique advantage being in DC of being able to go to the guys that had the money. And we built this whole computer network in the Eastern District of Virginia. The undercover operation that I set up at Cyberhook Next Gen, a good friend of mine and I, several friends of mine, we put it together. And most of those types of undercover operations run from about 6 months. The max they may run is a little over a year because you tend to shut it down and then move on to something else. Well, we were able to keep the network infrastructure running and keep the cases generating out of it long after I left DC. So it ran for about 7.5 years. There were houses seized, there were planes seized, there were multiple bank accounts. It was very successful. But some inside baseball of the FBI. There are people that get their opportunity to go to headquarters. They're jealous of some of the success in the field, and they will do everything they can to jeopardize that success. It's just a jealousy thing. It is what it is. I had left. I wasn't the case agent anymore. I handed it off to someone else, and the case agent contacted me and said, yeah, I got this guy up here. He really doesn't like this system that we've set up, and he's not going to fund it anymore. You know, they said they're going to move on to bigger and better things. Okay, well, whatever. But at least we had a start.
What's that look like today?
You know, it's been 2.5 years since I left the FBI. The jealousy part is probably still there. You have a lot of individuals that when they get into positions of what they think are positions of authority, that they tend to try to exercise that authority. There's classifications of supervisors in the FBI. So you have your basic field agent, which is where the real work gets done. You have a squad supervisor that supervises those case agents. I did that for a while. My job, I felt as a supervisor, was to do everything I can to keep a lot of the administrative nonsense off of the agents so they could focus on their core mission, which is to investigate crimes. So I always did everything I could to let me handle the front office. You guys go work. Then there's another type of supervisor. They're all it's a general services scale, GS 14. So then you have a GS 14 that's a squad supervisor. You have a GS-14 that's an FBI headquarters supervisor. They're typically called program managers. In the field, you coordinate the program, then you have a program manager. They're the ones, as a field supervisor, I would call and say, got this big operation. We need to get some money. We need to do this, or we need these types of resources. Help me coordinate it. Then you have the lowest, what we consider the lowest of the lowest level of GS-14 supervisors, and those are the ones that teach at the academy. It's the old analogy of those who can't do teach.
Right.
Those instructors would often bring myself in and a partner that I had working that cyber undercover stuff. They would bring us in as guest lecturers so that we could, make their class look more interesting, and we could kind of give some hands-on tools and knowledge to the people that were there taking this class, some type of cyber class. So yeah, you'll hear it, and at least when I was in, you heard, yeah, he's a Quantico supervisor. He's not a real supervisor, because you don't supervise anybody. You're just a 14. So anyway, I got called up to go to the this news division that was being built, the cyber division, and then there was another internal division called the Special Technologies and Applications section. And they created this thing called the Cyber Operation Deployment Unit. Well, my experience and my expertise had been in putting people together with knowledge and experience, making them into a team, and then going out and conducting investigations. So they brought me in to be a supervisor there. So affectionately, I was known as a nerd herder. So I had a lot of computer scientists. I had a lot of people with a lot more computer knowledge than I did that worked with me. I never said anybody worked for me. They worked with me. So I would get calls from the field on a myriad of cases. I may get a call from Chicago. Hey, we got this big case we're working against a school district, and there's some shenanigans going on with their funding resources and stuff. And we've got a lot of the computer evidence that we've collected. We've sent it to our regional computer lab, and we're low on the totem pole with public corruption. They're working, counterterrorism, counterintelligence, all these exciting things that are in the media. We can't get them to work our stuff, and it's been sitting for 6 months. So they would ask me, is there anything you can do to help? And I would say, all right, let me talk to my team, come back. And then we would take deployable servers. And at that time, the deployable servers were considered just huge as far as storage capacity. You can buy a small, about the size of a credit card of a 5 terabyte drive now. Back then, 11 terabytes was unheard of. So we had these deployable servers, deployable servers that we would take with us. And we would go in and make a copy of the evidence. And then we would go stay in a hotel room. We had, I was armed. So we always had somebody watching the evidence to maintain the integrity. And these nerds, these computer scientists I would take with me, would just attack it and extract all of the information. And then they would work with me on organizing it so it's in a presentable format for court. So where it's something that might sit on a desk in the regional computer forensic lab for 6 months to a year, we'd knock it out in 2 or 3 days and then turn it back over to them. We never saw credit for it or anything like that. Again, the jealousy thing would pop up. So when we showed up at the regional computer forensic laboratory in Illinois and we said, we're here to help, the guy that runs that lab did everything he could to make it difficult for us to do that. We had planned on working inside the regional computer forensic laboratory to process our evidence there. That way we could go back to the hotel, we could go have dinner and things like that, because it would be in a secure facility. Well, it took about a half a day before we figured out that they weren't going to do anything to allow us to stay there overnight or stay late or anything like that. Even though I'm an FBI agent, even though I had all the accesses, I had all the clearances, they would say, well, we can't leave you here. We have to have somebody that sits with you, babysits you.
Really?
So yeah, that kind of thing happens. Unfortunately, it happens. But the majority of people inside the FBI are good people, and they work really hard. Unfortunately, we have a lot of people in positions of management, a number of them that you hear in the media, that have kind of tainted the reputation. So anyway, I did that for a while, and I'd always maintained contact with the Jackson field office in Mississippi. They recruited me. We lived in Gulfport, Mississippi when I was recruited. I always wanted to get back there. the transfer list to get back there was very small. There were not a lot of people that were willing to go to Mississippi. I took advantage of that. I knew that it's a great place to live, low cost of living, you know, on an agent salary, you could be comfortable. So I stayed in touch with the people down there, and then an opportunity came up where they were restructuring some programs and they were looking for somebody to come in to be a squad supervisor. Put my name in the hat. Uh, Cybercrime was one of the areas that they were weak, and they thought they could bring me in to help bolster that. And but in addition to that, they added some other things, which I've become more of. I think I'm more of an expert in those areas than I have been with the cybercrime, which is civil rights. So they created this new squad of intelligence analysts and agents, kind of collectors, under the newly formed Intelligence Directorate. To do that, they had to shift some programs around in the Jackson field office. So I was initially hired to come down and run the violent crime, gangs, drugs program. That's it, just those. When I showed up, after I'd been selected, I beat out 7 other people to get the position. The special agent in charge at the time told me, yeah, we had to move some things around. So now you're going to be in charge of violent crimes, gangs, drugs, victim witness program. You're going to 2 task forces, and both of the cyber programs that we had, both the counterintelligence side and the criminal side. You're going to manage a resident agency with some satellite agents, and you're going to take over the civil rights program for the FBI in Mississippi, kind of the birthplace of civil rights. Well, that kind of worked out for me because I didn't have a background in civil rights, really hadn't worked any cases. So I had no bad habits to overcome. The program was suffering pretty bad when I arrived. So I called in
Now, what year was this?
This was 2006. So I got to Washington, D.C. in 1999. I spent several years in the Washington field office working the National Computer Crime Squad. Of course, 9/11 happened during that time. So, you know, I spent a lot of time working the Pentagon crash scene and doing investigations to support that. Worked the DC sniper case. I worked the anthrax case. It's just a lot of stuff going on at the time. Then did my time at headquarters for 2 years, and then in 2006 went down to Jackson as the supervisor. I was pretty young in my career.
05 is when Noah was born, right?
Noah was born in 03.
03. Why was I thinking 05?
Not sure. So
he was still young when
he was still young.
Moved
yeah. So yeah, he was almost 3 when we got down here. So we transferred down here, and they put me on the civil rights program. It was the one getting the most notoriety from prosecutors and the media because it's Mississippi. And when I showed up, at the time we reopened the Mississippi burning investigation, which is a pretty big deal. And I said, well, I need to learn how to do this, learn how to supervise. I need to know what the structure, the framework should look like. Contacted some people that were identified as experts from FBI headquarters and other field offices. They brought them down. They helped me put together a successful foundation, and we moved forward with the Mississippi burning investigation. And we were actually able to bring some closure to the murders of Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman, 3 civil rights workers that were murdered in 1964. Right. We were able to tie James Ford Seal to that, recruited Klansmen. If you watch the Mississippi burning case, you'll see the names of all these individuals in there. And we even brought back an agent that had worked the original case in the 60s. Are you there?
I'm here.
Oh, okay. I just see an icon spinning. So we actually brought back this gentleman, Jim Ingram, back as a contractor, and Jim actually worked the original cases back in the 60s. Jim has long since passed now. He passed away from cancer. But we brought Jim in to help us out, and we tied things to James Ford Seal, and we're able to get a successful case against him, get him prosecuted, convicted, and he spent his last days in a federal prison over here in Mississippi in Pearl. So after doing that for a while, I was kind of getting burnt out on being a desk supervisor. and I wanted to move on to something else. And the way that the federal government works, I actually stepped out of when I stepped out of management, I actually got a pay raise. Just the way the structure works, because when you fall between two pay steps, they can't force you into the lower one. They have to put you into the top one, the higher one. And that's kind of the way it worked out. So I got a pay raise to not have to worry about doing performance reports and feedback and counseling and dealing with the front office and all that. And I had
A
never worked
win-win.
a win-win. And they asked me what I wanted to do. And I said, well, I'm even willing to work healthcare, which is not a lot of people want to work that, or any other program. I said, I like new challenges. So a supervisor approached me about working counterintelligence. And I jumped into the counterintelligence program feet first. And after about 6 months into that, the supervisor that took over the civil rights program for me had just made a shambles of the civil rights program and had put an agent on that program that probably had no business working. It just wasn't a hard charger. Not going to name names or anything like that. Just, it just wasn't their skill set. That person was probably more adept at working violent crime, gangs, and drugs, and to put them on civil rights with a high profile cases like we were working. We were trying to drum up, trying to take a look at civil rights era cold cases from the 50s and 60s to see if there's anything else there based on the success of Mississippi Burning. So they said, we're going to send you back to your old squad, what they call temporary duty. We want you to continue to work counterintelligence because you're doing a bang up job there. So you're going to spend 50% of your time working counterintelligence and 50% of your time working civil rights. Basically what they want me to do is come and clean up a mess.
Fix it.
Yeah. So I came in and for about 6 months, worked on that, got it fixed back the way it was, reestablished a working relationship with the Department of Justice, who was kind of losing some confidence, and we got it going. And I had an opportunity to explore some other things in the FBI. When I buried myself into counterintelligence, I also took advantage of some of the training that was that the FBI offered. Step back, when I was an OSI agent, they wanted to make sure you were a good interviewer and interrogator, and they partnered with the John Reed and Associates has a basic and advanced level course that they teach. So
I'm familiar with the Reed technique.
So I went to the basic and advanced Reed course. So I'm certified in the Reed technique. And I got really good at conducting interviews, not primarily because of the Reed technique, but because I was able to take some of the tenets of the Reed technique and adapt them to my own style, and plus pick up on some of the successes of very good interviewers that I had the experience of working with. So I took a lot of counterintelligence interviewing. I became a hostage negotiator. So I had a wide range of expertise in talking to people and trying to figure out how to, collect and preserve testimonial evidence. That's a big thing too, that can cause you a problem as an attorney, is if you have someone that's not adept at conducting interviews. They get you information, but the information may not be reliable. And a good defense attorney, if I'm working for them, I can take a look at the information that someone got, and I can tell you whether or not it's strong. You may say, well, I can argue against this in court, but I may be able to, based on my expertise, show you some things where the interviewer actually introduced answers into the questions, so that the person you're interviewing is more more likely to give you the answer that you've introduced into the question. So there's a way to
confessions,
not necessarily a false confession. I'll give you an example. So if I ask you, my brother and your brother-in-law, Kevin. So if I go ask you, hey, Chris, when you were at Publix yesterday, did you see Kevin there? Well, you may be thinking, okay, was it yesterday that I saw Kevin there? Was it last time I saw Kevin there? I'm starting to think I saw Kevin there. So you say, yeah, I think I saw Kevin there. But that's different than if I come in and go, hey, Chris, where were you at yesterday? And you tell me, and you say you were at Publix. Okay, well, you were at Publix. Did you see anybody there? I'm not introducing anything. I'm just asking, did you see anybody that you know there? So I'm not introducing a name, which you take as a memory, and you see a face and you start trying to fill in gaps in memory or things like that. It's one of the reasons why really good crime scene investigators, even accident scene investigators, local law enforcement, when they show up on the scene, they separate people because you want to get their perspective. You also want to do it quickly because you don't want them to fill in gaps in their memory with what somebody else is saying or what they're hearing from somebody else. It's one of the reasons I tell people, if you're an insurance company and there's been an incident on one of your properties and you need somebody to investigate it, yeah, the cops are going to come out probably that day and then move on, and it's probably going to be a long time. It would benefit you to have somebody like me to bring it, myself or a team in, to get on the investigation early. Somebody that has the background that I do in law enforcement, that has a greater chance of being able to liaison with the local police department, of saying, hey, I'm trying to help out my client, this insurance company. Going to do it. If I find something that I don't think you know about, I'm going to share it with you with their permission. And, as long as we can work together, from my experience, after I get my bona fides, that I'm not going to do anything to jeopardize your case. I may actually help you strengthen it. But the more quickly that you can get me on scene, the better. Because if you wait, traditionally, like an 18-wheeler accident or something, if there's a horrific death, it's not if litigation is going to occur, it's when. And typically, based on just my anecdotal look, it tends to be about 12 months or more before the insurance company secures the services of a private investigator that supports their firm to come out and collect evidence. Well, after a year, memories fade. Evidence of video evidence or paper evidence, some of that stuff may not exist anymore. You may not be able to find the people that were there that were witnesses. And if they were witnesses, they may fill in gaps in their memory with what they read in the paper, they hear on the news, or what they talk to their friends about. So it's kind of odd when you separate those 5 people at an accident and they all give you the exact same answer. They should be able to give you something that's similar from their perspective. So there's a way to interview them as well. Had a big case out of Texas where there was a murder on a hotel property. And it was about a week after the murder, they were able to bring me in. Now, at that time, I was working with another investigative firm, a great guy here, but he brought me in based on my skill set. And I was able to liaison with figure out who the detective was that was working on it through my connections with the FBI. I'm just saying, hey, can you tell me, is there anybody on your task force that's with this particular agency? And within about an hour or two, I was able to actually talk to the investigator. And then once we had a long conversation about my background in law enforcement, he was more comfortable sharing things with me. So we were able to get a quick resolution on that case. So in about a week, we went and we took pictures of the crime scene while there was still evidence of a crime scene there. A year later, you're not going to see anything. We were able to secure documents. We were able to secure testimony. And then we were able to set up an investigative plan to expand an investigative plan should that insurance company want us to go further. We would say, here's everything that we've got. Here's what we would recommend in the future. And if you want us to move forward, we can, or you can put that aside and we can do it later. So getting back to FBI. So I wanted to test my mettle as an interviewer and an interrogator, and an opportunity came up to be embedded with the military over in Baghdad, Iraq. So I liaisoned my way through FBI headquarters, got them on board with putting me to work over there, got selected to do a rotation, what they call a rotation, which is about a 4.5 months tour over in Baghdad. And during that time, and it was during the summertime in Baghdad, which it was quite warm, I was embedded with the military, and I was based inside a prison in Baghdad. And that prison had a high value detainee area. So those of you that are old enough to remember what was going on during after 9/11, you had President Bush had a deck of playing cards with the names of all these high-level individuals that they were trying to capture, Chemical Ali, people like that. Well, this prison is where Chemical Ali was. So my job as an interrogator was to go into what we call a booth, which was about a 8 by 10 room, and it was videotaped. The military was adamant. This was after Abu Ghraib, so they really wanted to make sure that there wasn't going to be any more negative press for the military and the things that they were doing wrong with Abu Ghraib. So I would go in, and there would be myself, an agent that would take notes as I'm interviewing, and an interpreter, and then of course the battlefield combatant, or the what we call the jihadi that was captured that had been in the prison. They would bring him into the booth, and then I would conduct the interrogation. Typically would set the interpreter off to the side. I would ask a question. The interpreter would immediately translate it to Arabic, and then get an answer. He would immediately translate back to me. So it's a back and forth process. And it worked out really well. Got really good at it. It really honed my skills as a hostage negotiator, as an interviewer and an interrogator. And I kind of started developing my own style. I like the read technique. I like some of these other techniques. You know, there's kinesics, where you're observing body language movement and things like that. I'm not as big a proponent of kinesics. I do think that there are certain things that you do with traits, with eye movement, or something that shows that you're uncomfortable. It's not necessarily indicative of deception with kinesics. It might be that the fact that they're sitting in a room and they've got an FBI agent in front of them and they're asking them really tough questions, that might be making them uncomfortable. Doesn't mean they're being untruthful.
Right.
So you really have to kind of understand how that works. My method that I've developed, and I have a course that I have approved by the state of Mississippi to teach basic and advanced interviewing and interrogation, 2 different courses. And that course gives mid-level and senior managers in state and local law enforcement the opportunity to earn their continuing education credits. So my style.
And this is something you do through your company, right?
Yes. And it's something that I can offer out to others, not just to state and local law enforcement. I've had a number of attorneys contact me about the benefits of learning how law enforcement operates, how they ask questions, the things that they're doing. I think it can also help you be a better litigant in a courtroom, because as I've told you this before, it's not that one's different than another. You as an attorney have an expertise in asking direct, redirect, cross, recross, those types of questions in a courtroom. And in a courtroom, you know, you typically already know the answer to the question you're asking. You're just trying to get it on the record.
You should.
And I can talk about another thing that my skill set and my business can offer attorneys that other investigative agencies can't or haven't been able to. I'll put a pin in that real quick. So with what I do is it's kind of a casual conversation. You kind of figure out what your strengths and weaknesses are, kind of a self-assessment of your interviewing style, rather than me trying to break you down and mold you and say, you know, do the positive confrontation techniques of the Reed technique, or do the look at kinesics and look for body language. Look at manipulating behavior through conversation and trying to make people feel uncomfortable and see how they react, or make them feel comfortable and see if they disclose. Mine is more of assessing where are you at as an interviewer, what skill sets do you have, and moving from there. And I kind of help people get more comfortable in their own skin of conducting interviews. It seems to be very successful. To me, it's easier when people come in and I sit down with them and I go, hey, listen, we're just here to chat. I know it's stressful to you. You've got a federal agent sitting in your house. There's probably people searching your house right now in the other room, and you're curious about that. Well, you know, I have an opportunity in my investigation that brought me here today. I've talked to everybody around you. I've collected evidence. I've collected testimony. I've, put together an investigative plan. We've looked at everything about you. The one thing that I don't have is I've got all of their side of the story. I just don't have yours. And this may be your only opportunity to give me your side of the story. Because I got to tell you, you know, a good attorney is going to tell you never talk. But that can close the door of just clearing things up. I've had cases before where I've sat down with someone, we've had a casual conversation, and we find out that, you know what, this person really didn't do anything. They didn't do anything wrong. It was somebody else. You know, if you've got an open Wi-Fi at your house and people can drive by and connect to your Wi-Fi, and they go out and engage in nefarious activity, downloading child pornography, committing extortion, the FBI agent on the outside of that sees an IP address connected to your house. So you, even though you've done absolutely nothing, may be subject to a 6:03 a.m. knock on your door to come in and take everything computer related out of your house because someone else connected from the outside. So what I offered was being able to sit down as an agent and talking to that person. And I'm like, well, first of all, this person doesn't know anything about computers. Somebody from XYZ company set their network up. The only thing they know is they open their connection and they hit Google and they're connected to the internet. That's it. It'd be like your father-in-law, my dad, somebody using his Wi-Fi network to commit a crime. And then they come in and, now they're taking his computer and all of his computer equipment and business records and stuff like that. I think a good agent and a good investigator can sit down and try to clear things up. It does work. Not trying to talk them out of using a defense attorney. Not trying to talk them out of just sitting there and being quiet. But I tell them, it's a reality. And you can tell me as a defense attorney, am I lying when I tell you this may be your only opportunity to tell for you to tell your side of the story?
Well, my perspective on that is the opportunity is there for you to tell your side of the story, but you as an investigator are going to zero in on any kind of abnormality in their story or anything that they tell you that's not correct or true, and that's going to be used to paint them as a liar.
It depends. So it depends. And this is one of the things. I have a good friend, Jim Gagliano, that's a well-known in the law enforcement circuit. He did a piece called Confirmation Bias. And it's something that I saw more and more as I was getting ready to leave the FBI. So what I used to tell younger agents is you get paid the same whether you prove or disprove allegations. Go in there to just get the information. And if you do that, you'll be fine. You have a number of individuals that engage in confirmation bias. I know Chris Allen is guilty of this, and they tunnel vision. They only focus on things that substantiate that belief that they have that bias. And when they do that, they end up missing things. That's another benefit of having somebody like me come in. So if you're a defense attorney and local law enforcement, state law enforcement, or federal law enforcement is conducting the investigation, my experience after 25 years, I can pick up pretty quick if they're focused, if they're engaging in confirmation bias. As a prosecutor, you definitely don't want to find out in court and get a surprise that, oh, well, you only focused on these areas that support the predication for guilt on that crime. Here's some things that would have exonerated the person, and you didn't even take the time to look at them. Now, you as a defense attorney would want me you would want me to come in and help you out with saying, well, let's take a look at all of the information. So let's say here's something that some attorneys may not think of, and I don't know if you think of this. Would you rather find out that you're going to lose the case by surprise information that shows up, whether it's through testimony or something your client or the witnesses you call forth didn't tell you about? Would you rather find out about that in the courtroom, or would you rather me find out about that for you early in the investigation so you can say, yeah, this is not strong enough for me to go into court? Because your reputation means a lot. and the loss of a case can damage that reputation. If people see that,
Well,
well,
I get that. My thinking is, as far as a defendant client talking, um, it's usually safer for them to tell their story one time,
mhm,
and that is if they want to testify in the trial, they can tell their story one time, and there's nothing previous to bring up and say, "Hey, they're lying about this or that."
well, it's not just the
The
testimony.
more times that
Yeah, it's not
the
just
more
the test.
times that they tell their story, the more opportunity for problems to be brought in.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
from a defense standpoint.
what I was getting at was, let's say your client only tells you just a little bit of information, enough for
And
to
that's a problem.
that's a problem. So you would rather me try to take a look and say, here's some problems for you when you go to court, that your client's not telling you about, or the witnesses that you bring forth to try to support your case. If a good prosecutor, a good agent, if I'm on the other side of the table, and the prosecutors typically have an entire team of people. If it's a federal government, you get multiple agents and analysts and things like that. You don't have all of that. So you need someone that can navigate that and can kind of identify some areas of concern. So I'll give you an example. I had a case where it was trying to locate a witness and the investigating officer that was on scene at a case, at a crime. And this company contacted me, or this attorney that was representing a company contacted me and said, "Hey, I'm having difficulty trying to locate this witness for the last 6 months, having difficulty trying to even get in touch with the investigating officer." I said, "Okay, give me as much information as you can." The initial consultation is always free with me. I just take a look at it and I'll tell you whether or not I can help you. So they gave me the information. I took a look at it to see if I could help them. I called them back in about an hour and a half. I said, "Okay, I've found both of them. I've spoken to both of them, and they're available if you want me to go interview them on Monday." This was on Friday. They said, "Go interview them." Okay. So when I conducted the interview, and again, we get back to, this is a long time after this accident had occurred, and I get the perspective of interviewing the responding officer and this witness. So the witness gives me some information that, okay, when the accident happened, this is where the victim was. Well, the responding officer, when he got on scene, the victim was already being treated by emergency personnel. So when he shows up, based on the way that he conducted his investigation, it looked his report said the victim was on the other side of the car. So I tried to validate that over and over and over with him without introducing new evidence, because I want to get the accurate testimony of the responding officer and the accurate testimony of the witness. Even though there's that small contradiction in there, that's a window of opportunity of someone seeking to discount what the officer's saying by saying, "Well, your report's not true. The witnesses are telling me the guy was here. The evidence of his injuries indicate that he was here. The damage to the car indicates he was here. But your report says he was on the other side of the car." Is there, if you're a good defense attorney, you're like, is there anything else in your report that's maybe not 100% accurate? And you start impugning the credibility of the officer's report. Well, if you've got somebody suing your company and you point that out in a courtroom, that's a huge thing. You as
Yeah,
the,
that's a big advantage.
now on the other side, if you're the defense person and your witness is telling you one thing, and I interview that witness, and based on looking through the investigation, I identify where those pitfalls are. So I contacted the attorney and I said, "I found the two individuals. Here's one thing that stuck out to me. This person says this, and this small little piece of information here about where the victim was is different than what the officer's report says. And the officer has an out because he's responding to the scene and he's basing it on an aggregate of information he collected from multiple witnesses. But this is a problem. And while they may say, well, crap, that means we're probably going to, it may mean that we would lose. There's a likelihood that we would lose the case. That's going to impact whether or not you actually go to court and lose the case. Probably better to settle beforehand than to go into court and lose horrifically, because that causes problems. That's one of the expertise when you have somebody in my skill set with 25 years as a federal agent with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of training at the highest levels. I tell people when you go to the FBI Academy, it's like a master's or a graduate level or a doctorate type course. The people that taught my law classes at the FBI Academy were attorneys that argued cases before the Supreme Court. The guy that taught me how to shoot was number 1 in the world with a shotgun, number 3 in the world with a handgun at the world championships that they used to be or may still be held down here in Mississippi. The people that were teaching me how to examine crime scenes had worked some of the most famous crime scenes you've ever heard of. And they had access to things so that we could analyze them. My crime scene class, forensics class that I had at the FBI Academy. I mean, we had the case file and the autopsy photos of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman. We looked over those. Other big cases that you may have heard of. I saw the autopsy photos of President Kennedy from the Kennedy assassination. Those types of things. So you're looking at the highest levels of that. I had some similar things when I was an Air Force Office Special Investigations agent. You had regional forensic experts, people that went and worked at the hospitals in Chicago and, would go through dozens of autopsies a day to learn about evidence collection at those autopsies. So I had a lot of experience there in collecting and preserving physical evidence from crime scenes based on, going to the autopsies and understanding how that works. Had unique cases there. When I was the first 18 months, I was an OSI agent. We were up in South Dakota. First 18 months, we had 17 deaths on the base. And not one of them were the same. We had everything from a SIDS death to a dependent suicide, an individual that was drunk and drank drain cleaner and dissolved from the inside out, an individual that was huffing in his car, passed out, woke up, decided to light a cigarette and burned alive inside the car, hangings, accidental discharge of a firearm, shooting themselves. It's, had a wide range of that. So I had a lot of experience in different areas that help mold what I do as an investigator. And I can tell you the majority of the FBI agents, I would say well over 99% have never even been to an autopsy. So they don't know what type of that physical evidence to look at. Some of the people from our evidence response teams may have, they go through training, at the cadaver yard up in Tennessee on how to find bodies and what happens to them over time. But to actually, work a case where you've got a suspicious death and you've got to collect the evidence and prove it, that's different skill set. That's some of the things I bring. So if you want to, real quick, we could probably take a look at my website and some of the services, and I can expound on that. I do have an appointment I have to get to in a little bit. So let's go to, if you look at home and you scroll down, it's just basically an overview, a small overview. I don't want to overwhelm people with the first part of the website. This is typically where I get most of the calls. People will search for, private investigators or investigators near me, and my website will pop up, and then they just call the telephone number. So let's go to services up top. If you scroll up, you see services, and this breaks down the basic services. I offer more than this, but these are the basic services. So law firm and attorney support, and that's where we talked about that loss of a case can cause you problems. The other benefit that I bring is I know what I don't know. Sort of like I had a fellow investigator here locally contact me about a cell phone hack and wanted to get my feedback on it. If it's something, if it actually was a hack and we needed to have forensic analysis of that cell phone, I know people that worked for the FBI that are retired now that have their own businesses where they do that type of thing. That they know
Okay.
how to collect and preserve evidence. So that's something that most private investigators don't have, is the network that I have. Also through the Society of Former FBI Agents, I'm in their business directory. Uh, I can quickly go in and search. So if I needed somebody to go out and conduct an interview or process serve, uh, or just be a liaison for me in Arizona, I can quickly access that information to say who's in Arizona. 7 times out of 10, it's probably somebody I know from my time in the FBI, and I can reach out to that person and say, "Hey, I need your assistance here." Doing something like that saves a firm money, because while you may want me to conduct that interview, I can coordinate getting that interview conducted, and we can task somebody that's already on scene there. That way, you're not paying my travel expenses and a host of other things that you would have to pay for. But it's someone that I can work with, somebody that I would be comfortable with. They would perform the same level of expertise that I do. Now, they work through me, so I coordinate all of it, and I assess it to make sure that the person's doing it. So I'm handling all the back channel things, where if I'm talking to Steve Smith, retired FBI agent out of Arizona, I talk to him about the case, about what we're looking for in the interview, and I deal with him of whether or not I think that he's done the level of work that I would do on the interview. If he
Gotcha.
hasn't, then we keep conducting that. And it's easier for me to work with him to say, "Hey, listen, we talked about this before. Since you have to do the interview, you missed a couple of things. I'm going to send you back. I need to send you back to get that information and bring it back." And I try to do that to limit the amount of cost associated with it. Uh, Having me actually conduct the interview, there's less likelihood that you need to have follow-up interviews. And I don't know how many private investigative services that you've used other than me, but if you send somebody out to do the interview and they get in that confirmation bias and they're only focused on what they think you need to strengthen your case, they may miss some things. So when I go out, I don't. I make sure that I'm getting every piece of information at that time that I can. Something else I used to tell younger agents, that may be the only opportunity you get to talk to that person. They may not be available ever again, so you got to make it work right now. The other thing that I do is, and we talked about this, of information that you don't want to surprise you in the courtroom. You'd probably rather me find it out during that interview early in the case than we find out about it in open testimony in the court. And now
That's
you
right.
got a problem. The problem that you have with people without the level of experience that I have is they only know what they know, and they only know what they've read, and they only know what they've experienced. Whereas I've had the highest level of training that you can get from anybody. The FBI Academy, I mean, you have the experts that are there. They're the people that write the books, that write the textbooks, that do the lecture circuit. So I have access to them. It's a little different doing that than saying I'm just going to go down to the local community college and take a couple criminal justice classes. Uh, Typically, the people that are teaching those classes are those that can't teach. Uh, so anyway, that expert assistance right there with a law firm, uh, we can work with that. Protecting the business. If you look there where it says pre-litigation services, that's primarily for businesses that if they have an incident on their property, a lawsuit, something, maybe they don't even know if they're going to have a lawsuit. But as most businesses will tell, most businesses eventually understand, it's not if litigation is going to happen, it's when. So it's better to bring me in early and get the most accurate and the highest level of integrity for the testimonial and physical evidence that we can get that early. It's better to have it early and not need it later than all of a sudden you get sued a year later and now you got to go back and try to reinvent the wheel. it's just not going to be as strong of a case. The other thing that I offer up to the businesses is if you have sensitive matters inside your business, you need somebody to come in and take a look and see if you've got some fraud that's going on, some uh, people taking things, even harassment cases. It's better to have somebody like me and I still have a high level security clearance for another couple of years, to have somebody like me come in that can conduct an unbiased investigation and then hand you the results of the investigation. And then you make the determination of what you want to do. And I'm not there to prove or disprove whether it's a sensitive matter. I'm there to collect the information and provide you a report. And that stays with you unless it's, actual evidence of a crime that has to be reported to law enforcement. I'm not going to help you cover up a murder on your property or one of your employees. I'm going to tell you, hey, listen, it looks like this person did it, and I would highly recommend that we contact law enforcement right now. And if they call me to testify, I'm going to tell them this is what I think. I got to be able to tell them there's no confidentiality there when there's a crime. Sort of like with a doctor. A doctor that doctor-patient confidentiality kind of goes out the window if somebody comes in and confesses to a crime or that they're going to commit a crime.
Yeah, more so if they're going to commit a crime, I think.
Yeah. So individual assistance, something that it helps out the average person. Maybe you're recently widowed and you're wondering, I've always thought about what Stacy has been doing since we left. We were, sweethearts in high school. Well, there's a certain level of expertise I can present to that to help you kind of locate them. Of course, after I validate the reason that you're doing it, I tell people, listen, the liability's on you. When we enter into this contractual agreement, I'm not responsible if you turn out to be some kind of stalker. And if I get the feeling that you're going to go out and commit a crime as a stalker or, do something to harm someone, I tell them up front, I'm immediately going to the cops. But there have been times that people have contacted like, hey, I've lost touch with this individual, or I'm trying to find my long lost brother or something. Well, let me come in and take a look at and see what I can do. The other thing that helps out is if you're getting ready to put in for a job and you're concerned about your social media presence and you want somebody to kind of go take a look and say, here's the positive and negative things that I see out there. I can apply my expertise, especially working in the cyber realm, of uncovering information that you don't want to be embarrassed at the last minute. Consultation. Pardon?
What about like politics? Are you interested in doing, what would they call it? I guess it would be kind of a counterintelligence version of, investigate me because I'm about to run for some office.
Yeah,
I want to know what bad stuff is going to come out about me.
Yeah, that would work. That would be something that I could do in that area. If I was, going to run for office, I would want to know, what do I look like to other people? What are they seeing out there? And, that would be very beneficial. So if we scroll down, we get to consultation, just professional advice. I've told you this jokingly before, attorneys practice the law. I did it professionally for 25 years. So it's again, it's two different skill sets, but it does help out if someone brings me in and says, here's the case that the prosecution has provided us when they charge my client. Can you take a look at it and tell me what you think? In bringing my perspective in on what I see, whether it's at the federal, state, or local level. The other thing is, if you need some help, your kid's getting bullied online, you want to know how, is this something, who would handle this? If you had something that your case has just kind of gone cold, from working around local law enforcement, most of those detectives are overwhelmed with cases and they have to crank them out very quick. And a number of them, there's a time where they just go cold and they kind of get pushed to the bottom of the pile and nothing's happening with it. Well, let me take a look at it. And I might be able to liaison with them to determine, did they, just say, listen, there's no other investigative avenues to run. Is it because the investigator's too busy with these other higher priority cases? I used to have those candid conversations with people that would contact the FBI and say, "Hey, I lost $5,000. Somebody, hacked it all, got my credit card information, and now I'm out $5,000." And I would tell them, I'm sorry. Well, they would say, well, I contacted the local law enforcement. They said the case is too big. And that's why I'm contacting you. And I have to tell them, well, I'm not going to be able to get a U.S. attorney's office to prosecute that for 5,000. And unfortunately, that
Right.
sets up another issue, which I alluded to earlier, which is I'm in D.C. and there are trade associations for these big giant companies that tend to get the ear easier. If I contact the U.S. attorney's office and I say, Microsoft Corporation, I've got a case where they've lost $10 million. I can tell you in most cases during my time there, that U.S. attorney's office is not looking to dedicate resources to it unless it's minimum $500,000 or more, and probably not at $500,000 unless you got a great relationship with a prosecutor. They're just going to tell you it's not cost effective with the taxpayers' money for us to investigate it. Now, I did offer advice to people that have those issues with $5,000 is report the information anyway. Here's how you can report it. And you may find almost like a class action type thing where you have a nexus to a
Yeah.
number of victims that are the victims of one or more subjects. And now it's a big case. So now it's not just $5,000. It's, 10,000 people that lost $5,000. Now we've probably got,
Multiple victims.
yep, yep. So tailored for you, that area there is with a training. And I talked about that. I've got these courses that are already pre-approved. I'm working on some more courses now that I think would be beneficial for state and local law enforcement. But those things can be tailored to your firm. If you've got a big law firm and you've got some new attorneys that come in and they don't even know, how to build a case, how to organize a case. What are the things that they can expect from an investigator? What should they be looking for? Or is it like I did, where I took all these interviewing courses and interrogation courses, and then I, put myself with people that I considered had a reputation for being great interviewers and interrogators, and learning from them. Well, if I come in and do a small session with your attorneys on this is how the law enforcement, practices and protocols work, this is what you can expect, or I can say, let's sit down and I'm going to show you how a small snippet of how I conduct an interview or an interrogation so that you can look for things. I'll give you an example. I had someone that their 17-year-old child, they had gone up to report something to the local police department. And for some reason, the local police department was looking at their child as a potential somebody who had committed a crime. So when the parents showed up, the two detectives came out. Of course, they said, 17-year-old, we're just going to take him back there to interview us. One of you to interview one of the parents, but not both, can come back there. Which one's going to be? Dad goes back there. They walk in to have this interview conducted. It's a 15 by 10 room. They take the father and son and they put them in the back of the room, one sitting across from each other in each corner. And then the two detectives come in, both of them armed, and they're sitting halfway through the room. Well, the only thing between that father and the 17-year-old to get to out that door are these two officers with weapons on their hips. So I educate a lot of the younger officers that, there are times when
Custodial interrogation.
there's times when you have to conduct you have to give the advisement of rights when you're in custody and asking questions. I try to talk to local law enforcement about, it's not like on TV. As soon as they get in the back of your squad car, you're like, you have the right to remain silent. You have don't do that then. Put them in there. They may have an excited utterance and may tell you something while you're riding in the car. But it's not until they're in custody and you're questioning them that you even have to advise them of their rights. And a lot of, younger investigators don't even realize they don't have to invoke all of their rights. They can invoke some of their rights. You may just invoke your right to remain silent. doesn't mean you won't sit there and listen. So there's nuances to that. So anyway, so you've got, even though they brought this 17-year-old in, they started asking questions, directed questions, indicative of, we think you're guilty of something. The father was adept enough to understand, wait a minute, we came here because we're a victim, and now you're talking to us like we're a subject. I don't know if I want to be a part of this anymore. And luckily the father was there. Now imagine that 17-year-old just turned 18, and now the father can't be back there. And he doesn't recognize that this officer should have been advising him of his rights, because now he's in custody, because he's in that room. Two officers with, it's implied custody. You're looking at it, the only way I get out of here is by talking to them, because I can't get through two officers with guns. But the officers also need to understand that, because you, as a good defense attorney, if they bring that 18-year-old in and they start interrogating them and they haven't advised them of their rights, and there's implied custody, it's a custodial interview, that everything that person said in there, you're going to have thrown out in court, and their case is going to go to crap, because they didn't take the time to recognize the situation that they were in. And that happens with a lot of inexperienced law enforcement. It's happened with some inexperienced young FBI agents.
I think it happens intentionally sometimes too.
Possibly. Never intentionally with me. I was just skilled enough that I could kind of read the room and figure out, okay, what have I got here? There's a difference in me sitting down with someone and telling them, hey, I'm not here to arrest you today. We're just sitting here at your kitchen table talking. There's a difference in that than, hey, can you come down to, FBI headquarters, and I take you into an interview room and that door shuts. That's right. That's a different situation. So the last thing is, enhance your event. I've done some speaking events where I come in and talk about some of my background. Sometimes they want to hear, the war stories about what happened in 9/11, what it was like over in Baghdad, conducting interrogations, maybe some other, case that I worked on that was famous, or what's my opinion on some things. I found that after I retired from the FBI, I'm able to more openly give my opinion. Hatch Act causes a lot of problems with being able to express opinions inside the FBI. So if you need somebody to come in and talk about internet safety, I've done a course before where I come in and I talk to people about internet header tracing, teaching the basic person how they can try to figure out who's on the other side of that email that was sent to them, or how to deal with, if it's a harassing email, who owns the IP address where that came from, and then have your attorney contact that company and say, we're getting, there's extortion or harassment or bullying or something from somebody that was using this IP address on this date and time. What's unique is the internet service providers are able to share open information that I can't get to as law enforcement, because they're trying to maintain the integrity of their company and their system. So they routinely share information. So AT&T may work with Verizon to say, hey, we've got this type of activity happening from this IP address. Who is it? They actually can disclose that information to each other. They can't disclose it to me without, court authorization, but they can disclose it to each other because if they're getting, harassment or some other nefarious activity from an IP address, or spam calls or spam emails, they can shut that down behind the scenes and then move on. It's more cost effective for them because they're not involving a long drawn out law enforcement case, and they can handle it right away. So those are some of the things I've talked on, about active shooter, corporate security. If you got a symposium, and sometimes people just say, hey, I never met an FBI agent. Can you just come talk about what it's like to be an FBI agent? How did you become an FBI agent? Your background and history. They want to hear stories about, meeting famous people like Bob Woodward or Joe Perry from Aerosmith, those types of things that I've come across in my career. Of me having interaction with some of the famous FBI people that you may know. If you look over my shoulder, you see the target there with the bullet holes in it. And if you could look at it close enough, it's signed by Louis Free, addressed to Jake and Josh, my kids. So sorry, that's my son's dog is here outside the door. But that's pretty much it. I would appreciate any opportunity to speak with anyone. Like I said, the first consultation is free. I'm not somebody that that comes in. Okay, you got to pay $100 just to hear me tell you got no case. As an attorney, you'd want me to take a look at it, and if I can help you out, I'll tell you, and I'll tell you some ways that I might be able to help you out. Much like someone contacted me, another private investigator, about a cell phone hack, and much like when people say my computer's been hacked at my home, you and I have heard your father-in-law and my dad talk about somebody's hacked into his computer. It's not happening. It's rare that a hacker is going to target an elderly man's computer in his home. So
on his slow internet.
Yeah, we don't even get me into that. So, but having me look at that. So if somebody tells me that they're telling me that their cell phone was hacked, and I ask them what kind of phone it is, and they tell me it's an iPhone, they're probably more of the victim of phishing and access to their iCloud account than anything.
Yeah,
but that's pretty much it. Yeah, pretty much it. If there's anything else you wanted to ask, or I look forward to having some more chats with you. I'm going to look at trying to do my own little podcast thing here, whether it's in the investigative realm of promoting my business, or if it's something that the Lord may be leading me into in the political realm. I'm getting a number of people because I go out, I speak out on civil rights issues, and I've done so at school boards. I actually, if the listeners want to look into it, I was actually approached by Homeland Security today to write an article, a perspective piece, dealing with Merrick Garland's directive that he sent out dealing with parents and school boards. Because I have a unique expertise in the civil rights area, I also know what DOJ policy is. I was able to go in and line by line examine it and say, here's what I see and here's the pitfalls that they have. And that piece, if you search Homeland Security Today and my last name, or if you just search my last name and the first little bit of the title of the article, which is DOJ nor FBI, if you just put Hinkle, DOJ nor FBI, you'll find that article.
All right. I think we could probably have a whole conversation on that at some point.
We probably should. I just spoke before the Mississippi Department of Education just yesterday, dealing with some of the things that they're looking that I think are infringing upon the constitutional rights for these children to get their education. And it doesn't deal with mask or COVID. It deals with something much more nefarious, but we'll leave that for another topic of conversation.
Yeah, let's do it. Well, I appreciate you taking the time today, and I'll get you a copy of this so you can put it up on your website or link it to folks who are interested in your background and getting you to do some work for them.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it. No such thing as bad publicity. I just want to get the publicity out there. Although I'm based in Mississippi, nothing prohibits me from remotely doing some things to help you out if you're located elsewhere. I don't have to have a license in Arizona for me to do something from here, whether it's using my skill set at doing background checks or doing due diligence. That's something else that I offer as well. Is most investigative agencies, if you contact them to do a background check, they're just going to run a report that costs them next to nothing and charge you a lot of money for it. I'm adept enough to know that, things like LexisNexis, that when, for example, that the information reported in there is based on data that they collect from other sources that may only report it once a week, twice a month, once a month, or once a year. So if you're trying to locate someone and I run the report and it gives me an address, there's things in my background that I help validate that information. because you really don't want to waste your time if at the time that they reported that address, it was accurate, and then the person moved 2 months later. And now you spend time of hiring a private investigator to go conduct surveillance sitting on that house for 10 hours when
Right.
no one lives there. They're still going to bill you for the 10 hours. Well, with
Oh
me, I
yeah.
do some things to increase the likelihood that that information is there, because I believe I'm not a huge, I don't do a lot of surveillance. I tend to focus my expertise on other areas. I can do the surveillance. I'm highly trained in surveillance. I'm adept at surveilling and trying to find people that don't want to be found and are skilled at not being found. So it's a little different than your average investigator. Doesn't mean that you don't get burned. Those happen all the time. Depends on the anxiety level of the person you're looking at, and their suspicious nature that they think everybody's following them. So what I can do is reduce the time on target. So there's a higher likelihood that I'm going to find information that's beneficial to you during that 10 hours rather than sitting on a house for 10 hours and having nothing.
All right, good deal. Well, again, I appreciate your time today, and uh, it was really interesting. I found it very interesting, and I think a lot of other people will too.
Yeah, I think we should have a podcast on the civil rights debate stuff. I know you and I have gone round and round about whether or not defendants should talk to law enforcement or shouldn't, and what's the pros and cons on that. And you're a don't ever talk, don't ever talk, don't ever talk. I'm more of a, well, if you can clear things up and not, dig yourself deeper into a hole. Now, I wouldn't recommend the average citizen do it. It's a little different if somebody pulls me aside, or, law enforcement officer to talk to me. And I actually had a unique conversation with some law enforcement that was present at that Mississippi Department of Education yesterday, that I think that they had a potential of violating color of law. So, but again, that's for another time. We'll hit the civil rights debate next time.